All right. Today we're here with Dr. Simone Stewart. And Simone, could you please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your company and what stage you're at in your career?
Yeah, so my name is Simone Stewart, and I am currently working as an industrial policy specialist with the National Wildlife Federation. So I finished my PhD last year at UCSB in mechanical engineering. And so I started working for the National Wildlife Federation in July of last year. So I've been coming up on a year working my position.
Awesome. Can you tell us how you got to where you are today? Like the path to this innovative role you're in?
Yeah, so when I was working in graduate school at UCSB, I was working on research in the mechanical engineering department that was focused on energy and climate in a broader sense. And so I knew I wanted to continue working in that field since it's so impactful and it touches everyone. And at the same time, I was really concerned about the social impacts of the science that I was doing. So I knew that I wanted a career where I would be able to merge the science that I was doing with the social impacts to find a way to help people during the climate crisis. And so that was why I kind of looked a little bit outside of the box and didn't really go into academia and took a different way through looking at policy positions.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And so what did you see happening around you or like in this world that led you to think this job really needs to exist?
Yeah, so when I was working at UCSB, I loved the work that I was doing in the mechanical engineering department, but I also didn't really feel like I was getting to bring in the human and social component. So I also worked at the UCSB's Blum Center on poverty, inequality, and democracy. I was a graduate assistant there. And so during the last couple of years when I was working at the center and also doing my PhD, the COVID-19 pandemic happened. And so I did some info campaigns at the Blum Center that we were discussing. The larger theme was climate and a Green New Deal. But also when the pandemic happened, we started to see the impact of the pandemic, especially on particularly vulnerable and marginalized groups of people. And it really made me think about how COVID was exposing these holes that existed in our system in the same way that climate can kind of be a threat multiplier. If you are a person who is in a vulnerable group or a disenfranchised group, climate really only exacerbates the issues that you face. And so that was really, I think that opened my eyes to saying, wow, I can have a career in this field and, capitalize on the science background that I have, but at the same time, try to do work to really help people.
Wow, inspiring. What barriers, like personal, systemic, cultural, etc., have you encountered on your path, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, so very clearly, I'm a Black woman. And so, being a Black woman in mechanical engineering at UCSB was a really difficult experience. I had to create and curate a community really intentionally around people that had the same values that I did and cared about the same issues that I cared about. And I think that I found a lot of kind of competition in academia, especially in my experience, between the science is really important and then worrying about the impact that our science has on actual people. And so I felt like there was a split between, you could only care about one or the other. And I think that's especially true in STEM fields, that sometimes, we're trying to solve all the problems in the world, but we really forget about the impact that our research can have on society and have on people. And so my PhD experience was a really, really rough experience. And that was partially because of the system that I was trying to navigate as a Black woman, as the first person in my family in graduate school, getting a PhD. So it was really difficult to try and do all of those things for the first time while also worrying about these big issues that are happening in society, realizing the university was a microcosm of what was happening in the world. So trying to overcome those was something that I relied on my community a lot for.
What is some popular career advice that you disagree with?
One of the things that I hear a lot, and especially because I work so NWF has 53 chapters across the country and our territories. And so I work at the National Advocacy Center in DC, which is like where a lot of our climate work is housed, our lobbying body that goes to Capitol Hill, like all of the people are housed in DC. And one of the DC thing I hear the most is like, it's all about who you know, which I do think there's truth in that. I do think having a broad network is really important, but I managed to get my job at NWF in DC without knowing anybody related to the field. I was coming from really hardcore academia. My advisor's network was pretty much only other academics. And so he wasn't really, able to help me navigate trying to look for a job outside of academia. So I relied a lot on myself and some of the other network, like through CSEP and other people that I had met in my time in UCSB to help broaden my horizons for the jobs I could look for. But I didn't know anybody in DC. I didn't know anybody in politics. And I didn't know anybody that worked at National Wildlife Federation. And I was still able to get the job. And that had to do a lot with the passion that I have for social justice, but also the background that I had was very specifically oriented towards what they wanted. So I think, as long as you pursue the things that you're interested in, the path will open itself up for you.
Amazing. Simone, what advice would you give to students who are considering entering this innovation space? And is there any particular advice you'd give to underrepresented students who are considering entering the space?
Yeah, so as a person who fits into several of those underrepresented categories, I think I'm always trying to encourage students that are interested in innovation and even entrepreneurship to, one, continue following things that they're really passionate about. I think school, especially if you don't have a map for navigating it, if you're first generation or you're experiencing this institution for the first time, it can be really, really daunting. But I think that getting through is the best thing that you can do because there's a wealth of possibility on the other side. So for me, I really felt like getting through my PhD was like the bottleneck, and everybody kind of in my network and in my community told me, if you can just get past this point, which just past this point was 5 years of work. But if you can get past this and it's really hard, like the world is going to open up for you. And there's going to be so many opportunities, and there will be so many more different groups of people who recognize what you bring to the table that maybe more narrow-minded, focused people don't have in academia. And so I would definitely say that to stick with it and build a community of people who are willing to help you meet your goals and help build your network. And at the same time, to continue doing things that matter to you, that you're passionate about, because when it came down to graduating, I had a job offer from a national lab to continue being a research scientist. And then when I was also looking for jobs, I found NWF. And so for me, it was kind of like, do I take the path that people that are in my field understand, or do I go a way that, not a lot of people have experience with, that I don't have a lot of experience with? And I found that I was going to be able to do what I was most passionate about if I took the less traveled path. And, I didn't have the guidance that maybe I would have had if I'd gone to a national lab, but I think, I'm much happier doing the work that I'm doing now. And that, the last bit of advice kind of leads into your happiness is really important. And I think I didn't really put that first in graduate school. And so now that I have my PhD, now that I have a little bit more choice, I'm really able to put myself first and put my needs and my desires first. And so I would recommend doing that and following what makes you really happy.
That's so encouraging. Can you describe to me the most exciting or the scariest minute of your experience as a policy specialist?
Yeah, as I said, I didn't have a lot of experience in policy. Most of the policy related experience I got was from working as a graduate assistant at the Blum Center. So we talked a lot about democracy. We talked a lot about vehicles for democracy beyond voting and how to mobilize different communities. And so I think that the scariest, but also most exciting part was when I first got to meet with my first congressional staffer. And so NWF does a lot of direct lobbying where we'll meet with congressional offices and we'll explain issues to them, or we'll help them edit bills that they're trying to put forward. And so the first time I think I got to meet, it wasn't even a congressperson, but it was somebody who was the head of their climate group. But, getting emails even to this day of like, oh, Chuck Schumer needs something. We have to sit in a meeting with his people, or like, oh, can you look at this bill that Rep Hickenlooper sent to us? And can you edit this? Is super, super exciting. And so this year, during my time at NWF, I've worked on 4 bills that have been announced. And so they're all related to climate and, zero carbon type of infrastructure. And so that's been really exciting because I've gotten to even edit and add to the legislation. And I added 2 things to this most recent bill. that was just announced by Senator Whitehouse, the Clean Competition Act. And I was able to add 2 tenets that were not in the bill. And one of them was about ethanol, which is like a huge thing at NWF, but the other one was about the money that would be collected from this border tax. Some of it should be re-granted to vulnerable communities that are vulnerable to climate crisis. And so that was really exciting to say that like something that I had written into a bill to help people made it onto Congress's floor. So that was really, really exciting, impactful. And I love the work that I do because I get to help people and I can see the active work that I'm doing in front of me. So that was really, really scary, but also exciting.
Gosh, congratulations on already having such an impactful first year. I mean, that's amazing.
Thank you.
What are the most critical changes that we must make to face the future effectively? And what do you think the barriers are to enacting these changes?
Yeah, so in my field, you know, I say I'm an industrial policy specialist, and a lot of people are like, what does that mean? And I'm housed in the climate and energy policy team at NWF. And so my work is really looking at the decarbonization of industry. And so we think like heavy industry produces a lot of carbon emissions and they contribute to the climate crisis substantially. And so, you know, how can we decarbonize these industries that we need, like steel, cement, aluminum, and then kind of getting into the other difficult sectors like transportation, aviation, things like that. And so I work in, you know, helping create policy and create movements, mobilizing people around these types of concerns. So we talk a lot about the future, looking forward into how to fix the climate crisis, especially as we look at the rise in global temperature. We don't have a lot of time to do something about it. And I think that one thing that continues to come up is that we have to use the science that we have and the things that scientists have told us and the value that science has in order to combat these issues so we can have a safe future in terms of climate, but we also have to do it in a really equitable and just way. And I think that that is kind of a difficult puzzle piece because a lot of times the science is what takes the priority. We don't think all the time about people's values, about, you know, when you take it to a global conversation about how the global South is suffering from the, you know, from the climate crisis in a way that's different than the global North. And the global North was responsible for a lot of the emissions. So we have to do this change that we have to do on a really short time scale, but we have to think about the most vulnerable populations among us to make sure that they're not left behind in this transition. A lot of times when we focus on Western countries, we look at other countries and say, well, they shouldn't be using coal or they shouldn't be using this. There's a lot of kind of judgmental language about, you know, developing nations and how they're choosing to develop. But we have to remember, you know, the United States developed as well. And, you know, who are we to tell other nations that they can't reap the benefits of development the way that we actually did before them? So I think that, you know, we talk a lot about equity and we talk a lot about justice in this space. And I think that to be effective in the work that we're doing and implementing the science, that has to be integral to every conversation that we're having.
Simone, thank you so much for sharing your experience with this career journey. And I mean, your insight is just, it's incredible. Your experience is invaluable and we cannot thank you enough.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope that I was able to give some good advice and inspire some great UCSB students today.
Yeah, it was great to hear from you, Simone. So glad you could give us this interview.